Stephen, you want me to do the land acknowledgement?
Yeah, go ahead, Jack.
All right. So welcome, everyone. We're calling to order the steering committee of the Incarceration, Prevention, and Reduction Task Force meeting on March 4th, 2021. Our regular chair, Barry Buchanan, will not be able to join us today and has asked Stephen and I, the co-chairs of the task force, to facilitate this meeting. So first, before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present, and please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. I just realized as I read this, Ann, I don't know if you're down in Snohomish, but it's possible on Zoom that we aren't all on those lands, but at least we would be if we were in person. So in any case,
I think I'm still Coast Salish.
Okay, I'm sure you probably, yeah, it was some land at some point regardless. The first topic for discussion is the annual report to the county council and executive. And I think the questions are the development schedule for the report. Do we engage Mark Gardner again and begin thinking about the content and the structure? Jill, do you want to introduce that a little bit? Because you've got a lot of history with it.
Sure. In fact, let me start sharing the agenda again. There's a timeline that I usually work up at the beginning of the year to kind of keep us on track for making sure these reports are submitted in a timely manner. So this is what I have for the annual written report that the task force usually does in or submits in June.
Can everyone see that? And would there be any questions about that?
Do you recall, Jill, how long this report is? It seems to me this is the abbreviated one. Is that correct, or is it the other way around?
Other way around. This is a big one.
Yeah, this is the big one. And Ann, I don't know if you have your whole meeting packet for today open, but the last two reports that were submitted are included in your packet. They're briefer than we've done in the past because of COVID. But I just wanted to make sure you had that background information as well, if you have any questions.
First thing I would note is that we failed to submit a biannual report in December. And I was hoping to check with Barry on his views about that.
So the ordinance requires 2 reports per year. And the quote unquote end of year report for 2019 got delayed until February 2020. So we did submit 2 reports in 2020 already. So for 2021, then we would do this mid-year June, the big report, and then the end of year report in December of this year. So those are the requirements.
So it sounds like our deficiency was 2019. Okay.
As we learned over the last few years, who's going to make us do it?
Well, I think unless someone feels differently that going, Stephen, are you thinking as long as we get the June one and the December one this year, unless someone has an objection or Barry wants something different, I think we could probably move forward with that. I know we've had various council people participating, and I think particularly with the Crisis Stabilization Center, there's quite a bit of awareness of what's going on, at least relating to that. So that would be my thought. And I hate to blame COVID for everything, but given the challenges people are working under, I think that would be a reasonable path forward.
I agree. I was mostly being facetious. I don't think we have any choice. We'll just shoot for the June full report.
All right. Well, Ann just texted me she wants to do an extra report. If you want, I'm teasing.
Liar, liar, pants on fire.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So we have some clarity on that. Historically, Mark has done it, I think, at least 3 years. Yeah, Dan and Mike.
This is more mechanical than structural, but there's a new website that the county put out I think it's called Wacom Responds. And that is, I think the impetus was that on that one was for the LEAD program and other programs to report out. I just want to make sure that that's on our radar screen, because I think that this report would be a good landing place for that report to go. And so I just want to make sure that we know about that one.
For clarity for everyone, so typically what's happened is each subcommittee does their own report. The steering committee may give some suggestions of what should be in it. And once that's assembled, Mark has then taken highlights in the executive summary or the beginning of the report to really call out those things. So I would anticipate the subcommittees would do what they've always done, which is do their reports, and some things perhaps like LEAD would stand out, Crisis Stabilization Center. And then we would give direction to whoever prepares it. Hey, let's really highlight this both within their narrative as well as in the beginning or executive summary. And I think also historically, Mark has used a fairly light hand, sometimes a slightly stronger hand, to have all of the committee reports maintain a consistent tone, copy edit, et cetera. So we're using similar terms, similar tone. But the content and narrative was really driven by the individual committees as to how long it is, what they want to communicate. Is that everybody? And does that strike about how we did it in your memory?
Yeah.
Okay. And that seemed to, work pretty well, actually.
And a shout out to Jill, because Jill was a huge part, I know, for the Behavioral Health Subcommittee and kind of encapsulating our report. So thanks to Jill. And Jack, and all the piece that I wanted to bring out that is different, obviously, in 2020, the task force did adopt the GARE Racial Equity Toolkit. We're in the process of implementing that, but that will be a change in the report. And I think it might make sense to have a section, and I'm happy to work with Mark or whoever is a better author at trying to encapsulate kind of what the first steps anyways of that adoption. What does that mean? And how might we begin applying it? And I have a couple ideas I want to bring up today to you all on that.
Stephen, you're not coming through. You're not muted, but.
I think that's a good point, Mike, and thank you for highlighting the GARE piece of that and offering to do that. I'll also say Arlene and Raylene didn't have a chance last year as chairs to really work on legal and justice systems report. So this would be your first time through. I'd be glad to back you up on that from my experience as well.
So our goal today is to talk about, like Mike said, some things that maybe weren't in there that, in the past, because they're appropriate now, content and structure. But also making the decision about Mark. I think perhaps, because we're already saying maybe Mark can, do we have a consensus to use Mark Gardner for this again, if he's willing? Okay, I'm not, any objection to that?
Please.
Okay, so assuming we're using Mark Gardner again, I would think to address the issue of what's in content and structure, we've got some obvious things. They would be a report from each standing committee. So we know those will be there as well, and that would include index. And I really want to say, I get people are under pressure and have lots of responsibilities, and one report might be 5 pages and one might be 6 paragraphs, and that's okay. I mean, this is not, I think the committees are allowed to have some autonomy as to what they feel that needs to be conveyed. In addition to that, Mike will tell us more. He would like or is recommending that we consider a call out section to GARE, because it kind of overarches everything, I think, Mike, right? So that's something that kind of affects all that we do. Other than that, are there any other content and structure things other than the committee reports, other than GARE, that might be pertinent to the committee as a whole?
Well, I don't recall, and so I'd ask Dan. I don't remember how we actually engaged Mark and whether we made a request to the council to contract for his services. How's that played out in past years?
I think it was more of a head nod with council. I don't think it was a formal motion or anything like that. It was more, he had done some of the work in the past, and I think it was just building on that. I think it's fine I'll reach out to him and just confirm that his workload is not too onerous to take this on. We have a lot going on. Yeah, but I'll make sure that he's willing and available.
So would you just confirm that with Jack or me once you talk to Mark?
Yeah, happy to do so.
And Jill, wasn't the other person that did it before Mark? Didn't Forrest do it one year?
Forrest did it the first year, yes.
Okay.
And then after that, we just relied on the good graces of Mark and you, Dan, to
Well,
volunteer.
before Forrest is in the city of Bellingham too. I'm sure he's not real busy. That was a joke.
There's nothing going on with the budget or anything.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so that's that. For those of you that weren't here, that's sort of the history of how that went. The other thing I think should be included, and likely under steering, is I believe that report should identify some long-term goals, some things we're committed to working on, but I think that aptly can be come in from the steering committee, so we could talk to Barry about what those things might be. I'm talking about things that perhaps don't fall under a committee, perhaps some of the recommendations in Vera that we haven't done, or other things we've heard. So the one thing I think probably needs to be in that report, in addition to a report of what we've done, is what we hope to do and where we hope to go. And I think that would fit pretty well in the steering committee's report, because that's part of what we do. I don't know that it needs its own section per se.
The other thing I would say about that is that we're in a different phase of this task force. We kind of had this big bow wave at first, and now we're doing things as we can. And it would be important I guess I don't want to provide or offer any false promises to the public that we're going to continue to have a bow wave, right? That we have, we're going to move forward with as we have resources to do so, right?
Sure, absolutely. Yep. Eileen?
I think, this year has been so strange with COVID. I guess it could be included in each committee's report, but as the task force as a whole, of the impacts that it's had budget-wise on what we can fund, what we can't fund, impacts on trials. I've seen, that we haven't been having them, so we're having caseload back up. And that, I can focus in for the Legal Justice Committee on how that's affected us, but I think it's impacted the committee as a whole. And I almost think we need to kind of have some subsection that gives us a little bit of an impact on the delays and the struggles that we've had because of COVID, for the committees and the task force to be able to complete some of the past goals.
I agree with what Raylene is saying, because I'm thinking about, in particular, certain programs that aren't even able to function because of COVID. Examples are, preparing people who have been in jail to come back into society. Those classes, those trainings, nothing. It's not functioning. So on the one hand, we went up in services, and on the other, we went backwards in services because we can't do them physically.
Okay.
Raylene, I think you have an excellent point. And I wanted to add too, there's impacts to staff that support the work of the task force. The health department, most notably, has been wearing about 90 different hats. Maybe I got the number wrong, Anne, but a lot of different hats. And so have been pulled in a lot of directions. So, that's a factor too.
I think we had Dan and maybe another hand as well.
Sorry, Sat Paul was calling and my phone makes it go to a different screen. Sorry about that. I want to back up what Arlene was saying about some of the impacts on service provision. We heard from providers that certain treatment options were not available, in-person treatment meetings for like AA and other narcotics meetings. And I think that that's real, and we should acknowledge that because we're having to kind of not quite start over, but go back to that baseline and then move forward from there. So I think that I think Raylene is right that we should have some of the report should talk about the impacts, and that's fair. It's real.
Mike and Stephen.
The other point, just aside anecdotal, I know I brought up the impacts to staff. I think that's important, but I mean, could have a sentence or two. But there'll be something else, and Caleb, I guess I think a little bit of data. And another thing that's happening is some of our processes have changed. Raylene brought up how court cases have been going. We do know that less people have been being picked up because there's less room in the jail, and there's all kinds of issues. I think that in our report, it should reflect the numerous and maybe not always measurable, but numerous impacts to some of our data points, because I think we're going to want an asterisk going forward as we measure our progress or lack thereof. We will want to note the aberration that is 2020 and part of 2021, because it's going to affect some of that data. I mean, so we had just real quickly in the behavioral health subcommittee, Darlene Peterson and other staff joined us and talked about the electronic home monitoring, and they did a really nice job covering what was kind of different due to COVID. And there's substantial changes, not just in outcomes, levels of participation, ability for in-person support, you name it. So if the COVID section, whatever, could also include something about how it's going to impact our data, and that we may not be always able to quantify that.
Stephen?
Just to pick up a thread of Ann's point about shifting into sort of a new phase with the task force, I think it would be useful to recognize that back at the initiation of the task force, we were the focus of movement in criminal justice reform, designated both by the voting population and then the county council's ordinance. And I think we should recognize how many partnerships have flowed out of our work. I think not that we were the initiator of all of it, but LEAD is in place, and a number of other criminal justice reform initiatives are moving partly in the context of the work that we've done. So I think we should acknowledge the partnerships that are growing alongside us in the community, welcome the collaboration we can engage in with them. And this is with an eye toward the community communication, that there are a lot more voices involved in this work now than there were when we started.
It also makes it kind of complicated to try to remember. It's like this enormous a web of connections, and it's hard to keep it in your mind how everything is interacting with everything else.
I want to see if I can summarize where we are, because I think we could probably spend a couple hours with good ideas for this. And it feels to me like we're kind of drifting into, to some extent, what the steering committee's report may be, which is great. But for today, we don't quite have to get there. So here's where I think we are. We want to, and Jill, this is probably for the minutes, or at least find out if we got this correct. We want to engage Mark Gardner again and do that as soon as possible. We know that the structure of the report should include the legal and justice systems report, the crisis stabilization facility report, the index report, the behavioral health report, and the steering committee report. In addition to that, we want a section about GARE because it's overarching, and Mike Parker is willing to work on that and to work with Mark on that. And also, whether it's a subsection of the executive summary or something else, some overarching comments about how the pandemic or COVID-19 has affected all the work across the board. That could be that it's in the individual reports and Mark synthesizes it into a subsection, I'm not sure. but I think that's enough. From my perspective, that's probably enough for today in terms of our basic direction. And probably the next time we meet as a steering committee, we need to determine what we want in our report that would be in our report, some of which goes into the executive summary. So I guess my question for the group is if I missed something, or is that sufficient for now on this topic?
Well, Jack, I would just say, I'm looking at the schedule that Jill laid out on our agenda packet. I think we should expect drafts of the committee reports by our next meeting. Because usually it goes through a couple of iterations, and then we have that final approval in May, and that's approvals by the committees before the steering committee.
I mean, I don't disagree. That's a pretty aggressive timeline, perhaps for the committees. That gives them one meeting to talk about their reports, and I think most of them will need two. So the final approval for the final approval of, Jill, when you say final approval of committee report, May committees, is that the subcommittees? Okay, the steering committee does final review and edits in June. I think the May committees are final approval of the committee reports by the steering committee, Jill, or by the full task force? No, it'd have to be us, because the full task force would come after the June 3rd steering committee. I mean, I would think Stephen May, not April. But maybe Jill, I may be misinterpreting it. I'm not sure that I'm right about that. But if I work backwards from steering committee final review and edits in June, May final approval of committee reports, but maybe Jill can explain what her timeline was.
The report is due to the county by the end of June, which means it needs to be approved by the full task force at its June meeting, which means steering committee gets its final review before the full task force at its June 3rd meeting, and then backing up accordingly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. So if we had drafts in May, we'd have a month before we did our final review in June. Okay, I've got Dan, Raylene, and I don't know if I have Stephen or not. I think I do, but I know
Raylene was first. Raylene was first.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I just think that for legal and justice, we have our meeting next week, Tuesday, and I think this should be on our agenda to get started for a committee meeting as a baseline, and then we can review it on April so that we're ready to go for final approval in May, because we'll run out of time if we don't address it immediately.
Yeah, we're kind of in the same boat. And I just wanted to add that behavioral health has added 3 new members to the committee. So we've got these new folks who have not been through this process before. And so buying a little bit of time would be helpful for us. So I think that the May is better. I know we've got the deadline with the June, just by virtue of how we have to do this with the county council, but we have a lot of new people, and I want to make sure that they're able to contribute their voices in a way that's meaningful to the report.
And Jack, I'll jump in here. I think what Raylene and Dan described is pretty much what I was advocating for. I probably misstated it by calling it a draft, but I think the conversation needs to start now. There probably is a rough draft for April meetings so that there can be a final draft to the committees in May.
We're on the same page, exactly. I may have misunderstood what you said. Also, for legal and justice systems and behavioral health, I'm looking at your calendar. You have a joint meeting May 11th. So I think putting this high on your agenda in March with hopes of something done in April is kind of critical, because you probably don't want this topic on your joint meeting. So that, yeah. And I'm sure Jill will, what's the word, niggle, remind, prod to let us know that we have to have this, and so will Mark, and Stephen and I will let people know, because Mark has done some wonderful work for us, but it's not fair to ask him to turn everything over in 72 hours because we had 4 months and got it to him at 3 months and 27 days. So yeah, Dan.
Hey, Jill, I'm wondering if you can you send that timeline out to Mark, just so he has it, and I'll follow up. I'll call him today just to make sure, but I'm just wondering if you can send that out.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, do we have anything else on this? I feel pretty good about where we are with it. I think we've got a common understanding. Hey, and if you guys don't know this, if you have the new Zoom, I'm loving the space bar. If you have to unmute, in case you don't know it, you can unmute, you hold your space bar down on your computer, just this, and that temporarily unmutes. As long as it's depressed, you're unmuted, you let go, you're muted again. It's a cool trick. Okay.
Thanks for showing us what a space bar is.
You know, I'm around my kids too much. I'm sorry, Dean.
Jack, where's the any key?
I surrender. But let me give you my Quicken password. You can help me with my taxes. All right, Stephen.
Okay, next item on the agenda, how to quantify the reduction of prevention and incarceration from new programs. Really, I got to sign this because I chimed in the Legal and Justice Systems Committee that Arlene and Raylene did. And they had a similar presentation from Darlene Peterson and Kathy Smith from Bellingham Municipal Court on electronic home monitoring and diversion programs. So it was very effective data. I think all of you have seen in past years the kind of reports Darlene submits to City Council that has numbers of people with bracelets, the different kinds, the days saved in jail. She usually puts a cost estimate on it. And all I did was to say, look, we've got two things going on. We're trying to quantify all of these changes we have made over the last couple of years. And we have a theme that Dan has been urging us to move forward of communicating better, more fully about our accomplishments to the broader community. And so I think my observation to start out with, and I may be wrong, is that we're not really reducing some of these other things to the same sort of data points and cost implications that we are with some of municipal court's diversion practices. And so I just wanted to open that up. I don't know if that's something, Caleb, you're talking about very much yet in index, but it seems to me we've been saying we should be doing this for a year, and I just wanted to give it a little bit more of a kick in the behind in this group to see what steps we might want to take, both in quantifying the impacts of our work and in figuring out ways to communicate that more. You know, Dan's point about the Respond to Whatcom website that LEAD has just put up as a place for our June report, I think is a great idea in the realm of community communications. There ought to be others. And I don't know where else to bring that up and try to get a little more momentum behind these initiatives than this group. So that's why I'm on the agenda. I just thought I'd throw that out there for us to think about.
Stephen, you got Mike's hands up. And Mike, before we go on, I want to mention, I kind of forgot to go back to you on GARE. And so if there's something more you wanted to say on that, I didn't mean to cut you off on that either. We can do it after this topic.
Okay, super, thank you. By the way, the space bar makes my video go away, Jack. I must have a mutant Zoom. I'll keep trying on the any key and the space bar thing. I think, Stephen, thank you for bringing this up. Data seems to be something that, at least in behavioral health subcommittee, we had on our agenda several times to be able to kind of say, hey, what do we want to capture? And I think as there have been a couple of things that I hear in this committee meeting. One, that like bow wave, there's a bunch of initial work and a bunch of initial data and a bunch of measurement. And we were able to, the reason why we knew some of our stuff worked is because we were measuring it and capturing it. And, you know, if it wasn't for the sheriff's department letting us know that certain data points weren't being captured because the feds changed their rules, we wouldn't know that some of those firm footing of data had shifted under our feet. And I think what I wanted to bring up, Stephen, during the time in which you're talking about data and measurement was just, I don't recall that I've ever officially asked it, but I would like to today, and if that needs to wait until Barry's around, that we formally request that we track attributes about individuals that are coming through our system, and that we have in Whatcom County a value that may supersede or may go over and above and beyond maybe what our federal partners might require, maybe comes in their software. And the reason why I think it's so important is we won't know whether we're doing well. We won't be able to report to the people about what we're doing if we're not capturing that. Now, I am bringing up one data point. I know there's others, and I don't pretend to be that knowledgeable about what I don't know, but I'm aware of that, and I don't know whether and what a good form of that coming from this committee would be, because I know that is not that thought of like, we need to capture if somebody's Latinx. That means work for people somewhere down the line. And I don't know what that means, but I think that it's at least for this task force to state that we believe that there are things that are not being measured about folks in our system. And in order for us to be effective and to know what our interventions are doing, we have to measure that. So I guess I offer that, Stephen, not just to you, but to Jack or Caleb, if anybody has feedback about that. What would be a step about that so that we, the index obviously knows, index has been so helpful in the bow wave work of this. And as we go forward, what does it look like now to maybe shore up at least that one particular area?
Do you want to weigh in here? I mean, we have sort of a data thread going and a community communications thread part of this. And I think as I thought about putting this question out, I wasn't exactly sure where the index work stood, especially in trying to create uniformity of the data we capture across programs, which was one of our goals also.
Well, yeah, let me first say that we haven't had an index committee meeting since the last steering committee or meeting of the whole. So our actual meeting for index is this afternoon. So I haven't had a chance to really do any of the work that we talked about last steering committee. So that being said, the goal, the agenda for today is to try and get some traction on this concept. I've been talking about, well, really we've been talking about for years. Number one, there's more information in our criminal justice system than is held simply in the jail. We know for, anecdote's sake that, Bellingham Municipal Court, as Mike pointed out, captures data on people who are not going into the jail system at all. We know that the sheriff's office specifically and all of the law enforcement agencies in the community make full arrests to people, but they don't ever come to the jail. And we don't have a good method for tracking that information. And I think that if we were to gather all that information, we could show that we are actually making progress in the prevention of people going into jail. But it's hard to quantify exactly how that is if we don't have meaningful data. And as Dan points out, we want to make sure that we're making informed and meaningful decisions as policymakers, as sort of stakeholders in this concept. And we can't do that if we don't have an understanding of what the impacts are. From my standpoint, I would like to see the index being the keeper of the information, or at least a starting point for the information across the criminal justice system, so that we can say, when we do this, we know for certain that it impacts this number of people downstream or in this positive way, or when we do this, it's got negative impacts, and we don't want to do that. But in order to make meaningful change, we've got to understand where the data applies and where it really doesn't. So today, this afternoon, we will be talking about information systems. I mentioned it in the last steering committee that could potentially pull together data points across many different data collection sites, and maybe that's a resource for making meaningful change.
I mean, part of the problem is that there has to be an organization of information. And one of the principles I would like to suggest as something to use would be a simpler system to communicate with the larger community about our accomplishments. And a second tier, which would be all of the details, which generally people don't want to read. They want to know how many fewer people are going to jail. They want to know how many people are going to mental health court and drug court compared to 5 years ago or something like that. But we want to know all the details because we're the detail people and we're doing this work, but not the general public. So this is where those two subjects are kind of connecting a bit. And I'm here to speak for the communications because it's something that bothers me quite a bit. When there's so much good work being done and accomplishments being made, and in general, other groups, other organizations that are on similar paths don't have any clue of what's happening here. And I mean, that is totally ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. It's like they're going to see us as accomplishing nothing. And it's not the facts, so they're not getting the facts. And I think it's a problem to figure out what systems to use for the information to go out. I'm not sure about that. That's not my bag at all, but somebody has that understanding. And I mean, and people in general just need to know that this task force is doing X, Y, and Z, and this has been accomplished, and it has to be simple and clear. And the details, we eat the details because we need them, but that's a suggestion.
Even, can you see people's hands? I don't know, or would you like me to call it? I don't know if you can.
I can see Raylene and then Dan.
And it works. There you go. I just have to hold the space bar. So 2 points. When is the accuracy of the data? And I know that Caleb is working diligently to make sure that they get that information in. It's very difficult. It's not just a simple one-time thing. I go back to the home detention, and Darlene and I have had numerous conversations. We can provide information on how many people have had home detention instead of going to jail, but we are unable to provide information on people that got released because we were able to put a bracelet on them on pretrial instead of holding them on higher bail. We don't know if somebody else would have bailed them out in 3 days, or if that device, that data is unattainable to be accurate. And I think if we're going to report on anything, we want to report on the knowledge of accurate data. And if we put other data out there, we need to put disclaimers on there that says there's so many things that account to this that we can't actually give you correct numbers. I mean, I think about the jail this year, there was construction, which kept us from booking people. There was COVID that kept us from booking people. My warrants have practically doubled since COVID. So, but we're home detention as an alternative, which we weren't using as heavy a couple of years ago. So all of that data that comes in and says, well, we're booking less people. Well, what was it because of? Was it because of the construction? And so it's really important that if we're going to gather this data and we're going to share it, we need to make sure that it's accurate and not skewed because of 3 different things. The second part is the communications. And I think it is very important that we somehow get the community more information on what we are doing. I agree completely with Arlene on that. And I think it's been talked about before. I would propose that maybe we put some type of steering committee report at the end of each meeting that we could maybe publish out to the Northern Light, the Ferndale paper, the Bellingham Herald. Those are all on social media as well. It doesn't have to be very big. It could be very simple, just kind of a summary, because it may bring more people into the meetings just to watch, to hear what we're doing. Because I think there's a lot of skewed information from social media. I see too much stuff on Wacom Scanner reports that just, I run and respond, but don't feel it's appropriate. And I think it's because people don't have all the information they should. And it's not going to change everything, but it might give some direction for some people.
Did you have your hand up?
Yeah.
Stephen, this is Mike. Oh, I think Dan's going though. Sorry, my bad.
Oh, I can't. Who was in order here? Mike, were you ahead of me?
I think you're next, Dan, and then Mike.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I think I'm just listening to what everyone's saying. I agree on all the points. I think from where I'm coming from, so we just had a big stakeholders meeting with the LEAD program, probably like, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks ago or something like that. And a lot of good questions, really good session, Zoom thing, you know. What I want to know is, so we add 80 slots for behavioral health with that program. And then we have grace for another 100 slots, different folks. And then we have, you know, things like community paramedicine, kind of, these are all prevention pieces, right? How do we measure that? How can we tell the community, how do we tell constituents how effective these programs are in a way that they can go, okay, well, I support that or I don't because of whatever, but I want to be able to communicate that out. What I find really challenging is trying to report out on prevention. That it's like, kind of, how do you measure something if it didn't happen, you know, so that kind of thing. And, you know, there's ways of doing it. There's like 911 calls and things like that. You can track those pieces, but I want to find a way to report out, and that's on the communication end. It's not on the data end. It's on the, like, how do we talk to the community about the good work that we do? And Arlene's, you're right. People don't. This is invisible to people. This call is being recorded, but who's going to go back and watch a bunch of people process about how we report out on data?
Right, hardly anyone. And I mean, I'm serving on the North Sound Behavioral Health Board for a number of years, and they cover a lot of this material too, but they don't even know what we're doing. They don't have that knowledge, and they're very influential in funding programs, but also influencing direction of treatment even.
I think yes, you're right. And I think the boards like that I think we need to have a list of high priority organizations, convening groups. There's a housing alliance folks, there's the North Sound folks. There should be at minimum a list of people or groups rather that we report out to, that at least they have the information. And then when it comes to the broader, you know, how do we get it out to the constituents and to the citizens, that's going to be a challenge. There's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of misinformation, outright lies, and then omissions of truth, which also are lies, about the work that's being done in the community. So I don't know how we counter that. I don't know. There's got to be a way, though. There's got to be a way for people who are reasonable to be informed about the work that's being done, and it's very good work. There's an unarmed 911 response that was being demanded at the end of our budget cycle last year. We had 80 callers in public comment one meeting, and like 100 in the other, whatever it was, and they were just like, cahoots, got to do cahoots, and we had already been talking about that for a while. Yeah. And they just didn't know, or maybe they did know and didn't care and just wanted to make that part of their platform or whatever. But the point is that we're doing this good work, and it just doesn't surface to a public view.
Yeah, I mean, for example, the statistics on the emergency calls, our crisis calls, are absolutely held by the North Sound. We go over that every single month about the trends in the emergency crisis calls. Well, that's preventative work, right? Serious preventative work where there's an intervention coming over the phone. And so the person is not getting to a hospital or committing a crime or something like that. They're getting an intervention just from the phone calls. So, or from a DCR going out to attend to the problem and then direct them to services. So that's a place that has that statistic already for us to use if we want to use it. And I think we should if we're talking about prevention. I mean, it's hard to talk about it because you are talking about what hasn't happened or isn't going to happen. And you can only talk about that and say it in a clear way. You don't have to have the numbers. It's not necessary, I think, to prove something like that. Just explain it in a simple
You've
way,
been patient.
without jargon, without psychological jargon or social service jargon, just simple.
You've been patient. I'm going to ask you to hold on for one more second while I intervene. My real point in putting this on the agenda was it was clear before, it's reinforced now. We all agree on these points. And I think there are some looming questions about what to do about them. I don't know what else to do to flip this into sort of an action stage, but maybe have a couple of us sit down and try to hammer out some concrete steps that we can take on this so that we can go from the agreement that we've had for a long time and bring in some new information like Arlene suggested, like index under Caleb might be coming up with soon. Maybe tap into, who was it? Jed Holmes, was that Barry's communications person with county council? Somehow concretize some steps that we can make some progress on this on. Dan, you've been such a champion of this. I'm tempted to ask you to sort of pull a couple of us together, but I hate to put another thing on your plate. But I just throw out the idea of actually getting a few of us to do something about this. And I'll listen to Dan bat that suggestion away, or Mike to make his comment that he's waited so long to do.
Have Mike go first. I can respond after Mike.
Thanks for that. What I wanted to bring up is Raylene got me thinking when she was talking about prevention and how do you measure that? And it comes to like trying to measure changes in homelessness. So I guess my analogy is sometimes there's data that's knowable locally and it's pretty solid, and that's great. And that could be in your report. There can be times, two other possible solutions would be study it. Partner with Western on a particular program that we think is really important. And I know that's a big lift. It's work on our side, it'd be work on Western's side. We could, for example, though, partner on something like GRACE or LEAD or expanding behavioral health response might be worthy of actually studying a little bit what that changes. So that was just one idea to bring up. And I think this group, the reason why I bring it to this group is we might have to champion that because it's not easy. The second thing is sometimes national data can work, and we can use other, like if electronic home monitoring and that prevention work in Whatcom was very difficult to measure during COVID, might it be possible to use national data? So I guess sometimes there can be other solutions, but most importantly, we have some really cool kind of homegrown, if you will, home crafted, and by home I mean Whatcom, right? Things here in GRACE and LEAD, which will be very powerful and are already making changes. And just that suggestion maybe from this group to see if we want to actually study that, get some partners and actually study it. And then if I could, just one thing, my apologies in advance, I will need to leave early. I don't have full childcare. I think she's going to wake up soon. And so what I was going to mention earlier from from Gare is two particular items that behavioral health is going to start tackling a little bit. And I think I offered to come back to this group. So Stephen and Jack, if you will, just another 20 seconds, very briefly, trying to operationalize that. And I think for some people say, what do you do with that? Well, there's really no wrong place to start. But one of the things Behavioral Health Subcommittee has been doing a bit is looking at who's at the table. So inclusion matters, and those things matter. And we are not done with that work. And as Dan has mentioned to you all, there've been added 3 members. Part of that is the idea of inclusion. And we know we have more work to do. Communication can be a part of inclusion too, because obviously we want to get representative folks. And again, we can look at ourselves on this group here, and I'm not seeing a ton of diversity. So I think we still have opportunities. So that is one thing we can talk about, is kind of who is at the table. Another thing that I think could be really useful is a little bit of a structure. So for example, I'm volunteering in the Behavioral Health Subcommittee, but if we could have somebody who kind of agrees to take that on in each of our committees. Another suggestion of the toolkit is to have cross-department or cross-committee, in our situation, work, since we are kind of the jurisdiction that has adopted this work. So again, I would volunteer to do that role for Behavioral Health Subcommittee. And it's not to be an expert, it's just, to try to help operationalize that, make it less nebulous, and maybe enhance our ability to be effective with that data. So one, the idea of having a kind of a key point person who agrees to kind of take that on as best they can and agree to bring it up as we're recommending things. And two, that the recommendation come that we look at our makeup and composition, because I think inclusion is a step of a racial equity process that might be attainable and might be something, a good first step for not just the steering committee, but really for all of the committee as a whole and subcommittees. So Jack and Stephen, thank you for letting me come back to my Gare. My apologies if I do run off. That's because my daughter's calling me. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Dan, you want to take over?
Yeah, I mean, we tried to do, we had a gathering of folks. I'm trying to remember who it was Mike Hilly, myself, and some other folks trying to figure out the communications thing, the piece, more so out of behavioral health and not the broader, but just trying to figure out that piece. And we just keep coming back to it. I'm wondering, I don't know if Ann Deacon's going to know the answer to this question, but there's a contractor that's working, a communications marketing firm that contracts with the county to talk about LEAD, to talk about GRACE. And I'm wondering if, could we utilize existing resources for some of the work or expand the contract? I mean, that firm seems to do a pretty good job. And I hate to reinvent the wheel. And I'm not a communications expert. I mean, I know what we need, I think, but I don't know all the methodologies on how to deliver that piece of it. So I don't know, Ann, if you know the answer to that question.
So I think there's very clear and distinct differences between communication and data and evaluation, right? And I think, especially when we talk about prevention, we can talk about outputs. We can't talk about outcomes. That takes, huge amounts of money to do those kinds of evaluations to get accurate outcomes. So outputs is really what we're talking about. My thought is, from a communication standpoint, it would be helpful maybe from a professional to give us a sense of the level of information that we should be giving out and platforms we can use. And that person could certainly help with that, or others. But I also want to make sure that we don't, give a false narrative in terms of potential outcomes or infer outcomes from some of the things we're doing, because we will never know scientifically. And I'm just talking now from, research and what we do in the behavioral health system. I mean, it's cumbersome. It's very, very complicated to measure outcomes from prevention efforts. But we absolutely are collecting data now on some of our community programs, and we even have software systems that do that, that help us with the outputs. So that didn't answer your question and probably made it worse, but you know, I just think we need to be clear about what we want. And if it's just to, I think for me, I think a list of the programs that have been generated since the beginning of the task force is a great piece of communication, and maybe links to those that have other websites or things. But in terms of data, I just think it's a different story. I think we need to be very, very careful what we say we're providing people.
I mean, Anne, what would you, is there any way at all to explain to the public the meaningfulness of certain programs? Can we do that?
I think you list programs and their purpose. And the purpose would say, you know, the meaning or the reason we have those, that here's the intent of this
Okay.
program. And then you can link to some of the program outputs or components or something like that. But I just think high level, and to be really thoughtful about what we're saying to people.
And do you think that this consultant that Dan was referring to, I think I heard you say that that person might be able to inform us a little bit on platforms and level of communication to the public? Would that be
Yes.
like a one session thing? Could we bring that person in to the task force or the steering committee and just give us a baseline sense of how to frame some of the things we want to talk about?
We could, it's not part of our current contract, but we also have, I have 3 prevention specialists on staff at the health department that do this and are seeped in this research. And I also think we can probably just get it for free if we wanted just some consultation on how to do that. Answer those 2 issues.
Yeah, that would be better than what we have. So I don't know, Jack, maybe you and I can think about getting that on a task force agenda someplace a month or 2 down the line. The other thing I'd like to say is I think the list of programs has value. I understand why we might want to go at that level, but it also presumes some sense of what the flow into the jail was before and how we picked certain intervention points. There's a baseline knowledge of how the system really operates that would need to underlie that.
And that's why that sequential intercept model, why we've used it so often in our communications, right? Is because we wanted people to see, the flow through the criminal justice system and all the different ways you can intercept and divert people from it. Again, it's complex information, and I think we have to use as few words as possible in formats like bullet points or headings that make it really easy for people to look at what we're doing from a big picture, and then links if they want to get into the details.
I mean, I think that Anne is speaking from the position of government government image and presentation, and this organization is also, we're governmental also, but at the same time we're advocates, and so it confuses it a little bit, like which mode can we take? For example, on the Interfaith Coalition, which does housing for people with homeless people with families, children, when they send out a brochure, it's got factual information on it, but maybe on a side it will have a quotation from someone who has used their program and has a bit of a story to tell about how it affected them. So they're using facts, but at the same time, anecdotes, personal anecdotes by people who have had successes and are pleased with it. So, I don't know if we can do those kinds of things because, I mean, I understand Anne has a lot of good reasons for the way that she approaches this.
Gee, let's have another committee. We'll have a communications committee.
No. Well, how many committees do you serve on, Anne? I would just like to
I
know.
haven't a clue.
Have
I
you
would-
never counted them ever?
No, that would probably be depressing, so I don't do that.
Well, the other idea that caught my ear here is there is a network of potentially related organizations that are involved in similar kinds of work that would care about what we have been doing, the North Sound Administrative Services Organization being the one mentioned, but there must be half a dozen others. Let's think about compiling that list and thinking about how we can tie ourselves in, and that could be routing the June task force report to these people. It could be having a speakers bureau or something, going to their meetings and being available for discussion, which could get a little deeper. I don't know exactly where that would go, but we ought to be able to know who we ought to be speaking to as part of a
Steve and I think I serve on that board.
Yeah.
That's one of my list.
Well, no, I know you do, Arlene, but to have, I mean, are you making comprehensive reports and presentations to them? I thought you said they weren't aware of.
No, I mean, I just started attending their meetings for a certain reason. So I didn't even know that it was happening, that whole thing. And so that's pretty centralized for information, and yes, they should be getting this.
I think I lost it. Which group are you talking about now?
Say the name of it again. I can't remember.
The North Sound Administrative Services Organization.
Administrative
Oh,
Service.
the ASO.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You're on
But
that.
we meet with them every month, and we share my colleagues throughout the 5-county region share what we're doing, and especially relative to criminal justice diversion. So, and I think there's a lot of cross-pollination with us here as well as others on different committees. So I think the committees a lot of times do know, not always, and I think we have to stay on top of it. But again, that's part of the question, I think, today is who are we communicating to and at what level, and what do we want them to know, right? I mean, I don't think that we've defined that fully. And I agree that even though the report we do on a regular basis, annual or biannual, it's really to the county council. It's not to the public because it gets too dense for the public, right? So, and I think we have to decide, do we, we could have a brochure, but then do you mail it out to everyone? That nobody really does that much anymore. It happens, but maybe that's not it. We have a website. We don't know how many people access that. And so I just think we have a lot of questions we haven't answered before we can take the next step of what do we do in response. Not to be, maybe we won't get there today, but I just think it's really important for us to ask the question, who do we want to know what we're doing, and what method is best for getting that message to them. I don't feel like we've ever answered that.
I think one thing that should be on that list of people to reach would be the advocates for change of various organizations. We have quite a few in Whatcom County, and they're clamoring for kind of a negative view of our social service system, and in particular the police. And they don't really have knowledge, they don't have this knowledge. Yeah.
So
I think in
I-
order to move this thing along, I think
Yeah,
we're
I'm not trying to be a downer on this, but we've got 20 minutes and quite a bit more on our agenda.
I know. You know what I'll do? I'll volunteer I'll work with one other person on this steering committee to define the questions that have been brought up, and to maybe compile the beginnings of a list and bring that back to the group, but also more of a strategy, just more of a direction. And it's going
I'll
to
do that with you, Dan, since we're working on the same issue in other areas.
Okay, let's just do that, and we'll bring it back to this group then.
Fantastic. And I was going to try to wrap this up also. So I think we're all at about the same point. Jack, you want to take back the agenda?
I don't need to take it back. I think we just have Dan. So we've got 2 items. And let me see if we have no public for public comment at this point. So the 2 agenda items we have are reviewing proposed state legislation, and we need to get to items for next task force agenda because that's coming up. Dan, how long do you think the proposed state legislation section is?
A few minutes.
Let's do it right now then.
Okay. So basically, I talked with Ann prior to this call, and I think we're in agreement that it's pretty early on in the session. And so for us I don't think we should talk about any particular bill at this point. I think it's too early. I just had our deputy mayor admin person send over a list of the bills that we're advocating for. There's a huge list that we're doing, and there's 17 that are related to police reform or criminal justice reform. I think those bills have to go through the committee process in Olympia, so we know which bills have legs. And then I think that then it's appropriate for us to get behind them. We're in the long session right now, so we've got a ways to go here. So I guess what I would advocate for is let the reps and the senators do their work in Olympia, get the bills through their committees. When they are successful, we can review those bills, and maybe I guess I'll volunteer for that too. Whatever. And I kind of like a passion for that part of it, but I think I could work with another person on the committee to review the bills that were successful, bring those bills back for your all's review, but I think we could talk about how to advocate for them. But I think the big question for me is, like, what's the process for that? I mean, there's a bill that's being proposed that would decriminalize drugs in Washington State, just like Oregon did. That I don't know where it's at. So I would imagine some of us have opinions on that. And so how do we, like, just for example, how do we talk about that? Or a police reform that puts restrictions on law enforcement officers. I want to make sure that we have a process for discussing those pieces. I know we have the GARE overlay. I think that's super important, but I don't think we have a process yet for discussing legislation. So, and I don't think we have the time today to really hammer out that process, but I think that's really the big questions. How do we do that?
Ann?
Yeah, I just saw my raised hand. I thought I'd try it. You know what? I think one of the things I wonder now that you're talking, Dan, is so we are a task force created by the county council. Do we speak on their behalf, or can we speak as an independent entity? And so then who signs the letter, et cetera? I mean, we've certainly sent communication to elected officials and agency heads before from this task force. But I guess that's one question I have. And the other thing I want to say is that I am working with a local state representative, Alicia Rule, and have been in meetings with the state budget writers to get some money, a legislative proviso. So it's not a bill per se, but it's a legislative proviso for the budget to get operational funding for the crisis stabilization in the next 2 years. And again, it seems to me that that's non-political and probably one we would want to stand behind. But when it is political, then my question is, who writes the letter, and do we need approval from county council first?
Really?
The bills, some of the bills that are being proposed, we are reviewing. I think the next legal and justice meeting, we are reviewing Senate Bill 5226, which talks about DWS thirds, which has been a topic of this committee for many years. And to get some feedback from a local judge and possibly somebody from the Washington State Traffic Safety Commission, just to understand what it is, because I think it's going to continue to be brought up in different forms if it doesn't actually pass. And so that was something that I thought we probably wanted to just keep our eye on. The other one is, you're talking about the drugs. Well, obviously the last State versus Blake case that changed law enforcement's ability to enforce any possession of controlled substance is huge. So the bill that you're talking about that is sitting there, we need to see what's going to happen with the change that just happened. And I want to know how it's going to affect the LEAD program, some of the other programs. So that is on the agenda for the Legal and Justice Committee, because I think it's going to have some serious impacts. And I'm concerned. I'm really concerned about, I'm going to stop because I could go on a soapbox here because I've got a lot of strong opinions. So I'll leave it there. And I'm going to learn from others at the Legal and Justice Committee, and then maybe I'll get on my soapbox. But I just think if we as a committee as a whole are going to present stuff to the task force to endorse any legislative action, we need to be very informed of what we're proposing and why. And if I'm representing small cities and the Legal and Justice Committee, there are a lot of very strong opinions from a lot of different people. And so we need to be very cautious as a task force as a whole to make sure that we're in agreement before we endorse anything going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Raylene. And a little bit of history, and Ann touched on this perfectly. First, I think having this conversation absent Barry is kind of worthless because we need the council perspective. But I would remind everyone historically, I think one of the strengths of this committee has been we've made those letters and those communications by consensus on issues that were largely not divisive to our group. So we have typically stayed out of political fray on issues such as the Oregon drug thing that I know there are different opinions and spectrums. And my opinion is we're most effective when we're somewhat limited when we weigh in, and we do so on things like funding for the crisis stabilization facility or other things that are very much in harmony with the entire task force. The extent to which I think we take issues that can be divisive and bring them into committee will affect our ability to be effective in other areas. So that would be my thought. But I think it's really, I love what Ann said. Are we really going to speak? I mean, does the council want us to be autonomous? Because we are accountable to them. So I think I'd like to do what we've done before, which is if there is a request for the task force to support specific legislation, let it come to the task force. And as far as the philosophy, let's get the council's perspective on where they see our role. And of course, we have some autonomy. We could still, as a task force, choose to do something. But I like that we've done it by consensus, and I hope we can stay there because it's allowed us to, I think, be more effective.
Yeah, just so you all know, according to the enabling ordinance for the task force, it specifically says the task force will consider national best practices and report on and make recommendations to the county council, executive, and other appropriate officials regarding, and then the list of everything the task force works on. So any official recommendation, as you all know, will need to come from at least a majority of the task force members by vote. Whether that recommendation goes to the council and the executive only, I would probably want to consult with our legal counsel to make sure it would be appropriate to send it to someone other than those two groups. So I just wanted to make sure you guys have that information on
Sure.
What is in the enabling ordinance.
I mean, maybe you can check with Barry. I know in the past we have gone outside, but I don't know if we should have. So I think, so having clarity on what we can and can't do might really inform what we should be doing.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree with that step. I would also just add the fact that there is political disagreement about something isn't the only cautionary flag. I think our opinions, as long as they are grounded in our charge to prevent and reduce incarceration, I think we're on pretty solid ground having an opinion on that. Now, who it goes to is a different question. But there can be political pushback on all sorts of things that would prevent or reduce incarceration. I don't think necessarily we ought to be stymied by the fact that there is that disagreement, as long as there's some clarity around what our mission is. So I would just add that.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, and if we were all in agreement, we wouldn't need to meet.
So Dan and Ann, my question for you is, because I don't track this stuff very closely, how does the legislative scheduling for the progression of bills fit with our meeting schedules, both for the steering committee and the coming task force? Because a lot of times there's not a lot of time for us to actually get our membership up to speed on the issues involved, let alone have the debate and have time to respond if we were going to.
Well, I can tell you that they don't consult with us, that's for sure, on their timeline. And I think it's just different on, committee, our bills die in committees at different points in the timeline. I think we're early right now. So I think, maybe like in a month, we could probably talk about if we have these questions resolved, which we don't. I think April, May, depends on the session. The short session is a little bit different, but this one, I think April would be appropriate for advocacy. I don't know that I don't have the schedule in front of me. I don't know that it lines up completely. But I do think that these questions need to be resolved. I just want to, I'm watching the time here, and I just want to, my part closing on this topic is that I think Barry, as a county council member, needs to be in this discussion. Ann's brought up some really good points. And some of these things are really divisive. And Jack, you said it, you made me just really think about, when are we effective? It's when we're consensus driven and we all kind of agree, like, yeah, this is a good idea. It goes to our charge. But then I listened to Stephen saying, we're on solid ground with stuff. And so I'm like that kind of back and forth going like, this is complex and I don't want to do the wrong thing. I want to do the right thing as a body that makes recommendations to a political unit, county council government. So I'd like to revisit this topic with Barry. I know I hate to beat the dead horse, but this has got to get resolved. I think it is part of what we do. And I think we need to have clear, I know that Jill, and thanks for reading that, that gives us some kind of direction, but I think that we within the group need to have better consensus on this. So if it pleases the group, I'd like to revisit this with Barry.
I guess perfect. Okay, we've got about 6 or 7 minutes to talk about our agenda. I think next time we should flip the agenda and do this more toward the top. So Jill, I'm going to ask you to help. I see you've listed, I think, what are potential items for the next task force agenda. And Stephen, Jill, and I collectively have been pretty good about filling in if, things, to make sure the time is used well, if the special things that aren't normally on the agenda don't fill the time. But Jill, do you want to tell us what we have, already that we know of that's perhaps not the normal committee reports and things?
Nothing. The only thing I have for the upcoming agenda for the task force are committee reports. And if you'd like to schedule it, the update by jurisdictions. The only item of business for the task force is through a committee report, Dan, is the Behavioral Health Committee addition of Britta Johnson onto the committee. That needs to formally be added to the list of committee members that the task force approves at the beginning of every year.
Oh, perfect. I thought that was a report. That's just adding. I thought that could, okay, got it.
Right. So the committee has added Britta officially to be on their committee, and the task force basically just needs to affirm that inclusion.
We've got Ann and Raylene. I don't know if your hand is up new or it's okay. Ann, go ahead, and then Dan.
I really like this component of GoToMeeting. I just wanted to, I think I would like to put forth a motion at the next meeting, just as a placeholder, that if it's needed, that the task force will work with county council to submit a letter of support for the legislative proviso that I was just talking about, to fund operations at the Crisis Stabilization Center. It may not be needed. It may be going through easily and we can save ourselves, but if we have to do it at the last minute, I would love to already have it on the record.
Yeah, anybody object to that? We've done it in the past. Okay, let's put that up there. Okay, done.
Dan, Britta is not the only one you're adding to the committee, right?
Right, well, that's what I was going to say. So what I wanted to do is to round out the committee. So Britta is from Lake Whatcom Residential Treatment Center. So she brings that kind of clinical experience. And then we have Chris Cochran. Is that right? From Bellingham Schools. I'm asking my wife. She's a school board director. And he's the mental health coordinator for the district. And so he brings that perspective, which kind of speaks to our upstream prevention piece, right? Yeah. And then we have Brian Thane from Bellingham and Whatcom Housing Authority. And he is an expert in providing basically like public housing and sort of the things that are dealt with there. And so that's part of the rounding out that Mike Parker was speaking out before. There's more work to do, but I want to make sure, Jill, that those two folks are included. My understanding was that we didn't need that those new folks just need to be in the committee. They don't need to be on the task force. So if I'm wrong on that, then I've got some backtracking.
No, I totally understand. And yes, I had those names, those new names, Chris and a housing authority representative at the beginning of the year. So they're already approved as committee members.
Okay.
On the committee. So that was done in, I think, at the January meetings. So Britta is the newest of the new. How's that?
Okay, perfect. Great.
The other thing, would it make sense to see if Mark's often at those meetings, whether it's Mark or Jill? I think it would be a good use of time to spend 5 or 10 minutes talking about an annual report, that we're going to be doing this, getting people thinking about it. And it might not hurt if Mark or someone talked about how he puts it together and what would be helpful. And that would seem like a good use of time and get it on people's radar.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I would love to include Mark and that topic on all of the March agendas for the upcoming committees. Caleb, it might be a little late for index today, but that's okay. But I would very definitely want to be respectful of Mark and his time and workload, and want to wait until I hear from him and or Dan on whether this is something he can even take on right now. So if I get the okay from him, then absolutely I'll start working with him. He's been really great to work with in the past. So
Jill, would it make sense if you and Mark kind of took, if he's able and capable, if the two of you sort of shared how it's worked in the past and what might be helpful?
Sure.
I think that would be useful for everyone to hear.
Yeah.
Okay. Caleb?
I was just going to say that it is too late, I think, to make an alteration to the agenda, but the upcoming report is, being the new kid on the block, again, something that is going to have to come up in this meeting. We won't have time to accomplish it otherwise. So it will be another business item that I bring up.
Stephen?
It's probably me being overly aggressive again, but I'm wondering if it might be appropriate by that point to have some report out from Dan and Ann talking about communications, maybe even the presentation by Ann's prevention staff on how to communicate complicated stuff to the general public. Is that pushing too fast?
Are you talking about for the next task force meeting?
Yes.
Oh, what's the date again on that?
That date
Is it
is March 15th.
a week
Oh.
from Monday?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was out of whack time-wise. There's no way that's that's realistic.
Well, I think if I had staff available, they already have the information. I think the question is, to what extent do we want details? But, Dan and I can figure that out. You can certainly put it on the agenda, and Dan and I can figure out what level we want to present it.
Would you like that as a separate agenda item, Stephen, or as a report out from steering committee?
I would favor a separate agenda item, but I would listen to other views also. I'd like to highlight the importance that we're giving to external communications, is why I say that.
And Stephen, were you saying for March 15th or not?
Well, I didn't have that date in mind. I was thinking about the next steering committee meeting in early April. But Ann says you two can talk about that and see if you could do something March 15th.
Okay.
Yeah, but it would be an introduction, not like
Yeah, you can
come with all the
foreshadow it.
answers.
Yeah, you can introduce it as a topic.
Okay.
Yeah, and how we might.
Dan, I
approach it.
see the hesitation on your face. I know what that's about. So you and Ann decide whether that's at all feasible, and I'm going with what you think.
Okay. Let's have Ann and I talk offline. March 15th is a special meeting for City Council to vote on whether to adopt a sales tax that would generate $3 million for affordable housing, and it's sort of complicated.
It's also the Ides of March, Dan. I don't know.
Beware
Is that good or bad? I can't.
Beware the Ides of
Beware
March.
the Ides of March. I mean, yeah.
Watch your back.
Okay, so we've got like 2 minutes left. Other than the topics we're discussing, and Ann and Dan, feel free to tell Jill not to have that communication on there, or look at it as an introduction. I agree with Stephen. Having it in this agenda item does highlight the importance. Other than that, what we'll do is have the committee reports, and we'll ask for jurisdiction reports from, if we can get them, from small cities, Whatcom County, and City of Bellingham. So that means we need to reach out to Darlene. And Raylene, you've usually historically done that, and probably Sheriff Elfo. It's been a while since we've had those, so I think it'd be good to get that information if we can. Is there anything else? Yes, Raylene.
On other business, I would like to just have people think about changes for the future that we might be doing because of COVID. So we've been doing Zoom meetings for a while. When things go back to where we can meet in person, are we going to continue doing Zoom meetings? Is the court going to continue doing hearings through Zoom and through telephone for people that aren't available? I would just like to see some of the changes that we've done. How is that going to be in the future when things open up, and just kind of thoughts of how that's going to affect our committee, our meetings, different topics. And just to kind of put that out there for thought, food for thought. Thanks.
Do you want to put that out to the whole task force or the steering committee?
I think it could go to the steering committee, and then subcommittees could look at it, and then it can come back to the task force if we think it's warranted. But I just want to, are we going to continue doing Zoom meetings later on through this? I mean, there are definitely some benefits. There's things that I can't get to otherwise. So
my belief is we're going to be hybrid for a long time. Meaning there's some pros and cons. There's certainly advantages to face-to-face that we lose this way, and there's certainly advantages to doing this. And I think the world has changed. So I suspect that some component of this will continue. And hopefully when we're all feeling safe or vaccinated or whatever that means for us, we can have some in-person as well. That'd be my take on it. So I'm part of a worldwide organization that we met 8 times a year in Los Angeles, and we'll probably only be meeting 3, even when budgets and travel aren't an issue, because even though people are getting up at 3 a.m. in Malaysia or New Zealand, they don't have to fly to Los Angeles. So it's working pretty well. But we miss the face-to-face, and I think, yeah. All right. Anything else for the good of the order? Jill, do you have enough to craft an agenda?
I think so. It'll be a short agenda, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Stephen, you want to do public comment? It should be pretty low key.
Sure. Is there anyone from the public joining us who would like to comment?
We do not have any attendees today.
Oh, Dan's wife, maybe.
Kelly, have anything she want to say, Dan?
No.
Yay.
Good to see you.
Good to see everybody.
All right.
Okay, then we'll stand adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Good meeting. Thanks for being here.